We're about 2 minutes after, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. So first, just want to say hello to everyone and good morning. I'm Samantha Dyna. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the Department of Labor, and good to see you all. Blaine or Stacy, was there anything that you guys wanted to just jump in with in terms of framing or welcome before we start?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. Hello, everyone, and good morning. In case you don't know me, my name is Blaine Flanders. I'm the Senior Manager for Program Performance at the Central Western Maine Workforce Development Board for Region 3. First, I'd like to thank MDOL and the SWB for having our Workforce Board here today. I'd also like to say a special thank you to our partners and individuals who we sent invitations to for this listening session who are here today. I see a few of you on right now. A special thank you to Kim Lindloff and Bruce Nodden. I see you two are here. For Auburn, Glenn Holmes, I see you. Rep Havenos and Rep Fay, I think you might be here today. Senator King's reps, Rep Wilkinson and Rep Tucker, I'm not sure if you're here. And the City of Lewiston's HR Director, Heather Terralt, I think you might be here as well. And Monique Roy, I do see you here. Welcome, all of you. This is a great opportunity to make suggestions and comments to MDOL and the SWB for the ARPA funds, especially for this region. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Sam and Chris, for having me and having the board. And with all that said, I'd like to pass this meeting over back to Sam. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all. I'm seeing some additional shout outs in the chat. As we are getting started, please feel free to use that chat and say a quick hello, name, organization, so we can get a sense of who is on the call. But just in those initial shout outs, sounds like we've got a lot of great folks from different sectors. So we'll have a really good conversation today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can jump into what we're going to be talking about today. And I don't want to spend 90 minutes talking at you. So just to frame up, I'm just going to spend the first 15 or 20 minutes giving some background, and then I promise we will get into some small groups, and we really want to hear from you. The goal today is a listening session. So I don't want to do much talking at you. We want to be listening to you and hearing your thoughts and feedback and your ideas to really inform where some of this planning and implementation planning can go with our Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So our goals for today, we want to discuss the current state of workforce and really start quickly brainstorming with all of you. How can we approach workforce development collaboratively, innovatively, equitably? We're at a really unique moment in our workforce landscape today, coming out of the recession, going into economic recovery. We're all feeling very different dynamics and recognizing that it is a tight labor market. So I want to talk with you all around how can we quickly get to solutions and work together as a workforce system to really work differently in the future. So we're going to capture your ideas, feedback, and questions to inform our economic recovery planning. As we move through, please feel free to use the chat. So go ahead, add any questions, comments in there. Also feel free to unmute. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes here just providing some lay of the land, and then I'll make sure that we open it up for some questions, and then we'll get into some breakout groups to make sure you guys really do have a chance to engage. But use that chat. We'll also put a survey at the end of the session to just get a sense of, we only got 90 minutes together. There might be lots of other thoughts and ideas, so we want to give you that chance to provide additional input as well. Okay, so just in terms of background, our economy is continuing to recover and the workforce landscape is continuing to evolve. So we're seeing things around workers demanding different work conditions, increased demands for flexibility, for more predictability, for more remote work. So definitely seeing workers demanding different things as people have prioritized different things coming out of this pandemic. And so really wanting to work with you all, with our workers, with employers, to think about how we can approach things more collaboratively and innovatively as we face this challenge together. So what we're seeing in terms of the labor force, so about 20 years ago is when we kind of hit a peak in terms of the largest Maine labor force. And since then we have had an aging workforce, so the labor force participation rate has been decreasing over the last 20 years. So even before the pandemic, we were seeing lower individuals in terms of participating in the labor market. And so what we're seeing are there's areas of opportunity to engage workers that might traditionally and historically be on the sidelines, that we really want to make sure that we're working with all of you to think creatively about how we can engage them differently to participate in the workforce, especially given the tight labor market that we're seeing today. So we're seeing some counties that struggle with lower unemployment as well due to lower rates of economic activity. We're also seeing individuals with lower educational attainment being more likely to not be engaged in the workforce, and also experiencing longer durations of unemployment once they do file. Individuals with disabilities are more likely to be disconnected from work. BIPOC communities, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, communities have disproportionate rates of unemployment, and women are disproportionately represented in the current unemployment claimant population as well. So lots of communities that we can think differently about in terms of engaging more deeply to really be fully engaged in the workforce as we move forward in this economic recovery, really keeping those populations front of mind. So some of you may have seen this. A couple of weeks ago, we released the results from a survey. And so we put a survey out this summer to the current unemployment claimant population and individuals that were actively using main job links. So those that were active job seekers. It was about 40,000 folks that we sent the survey out to, and we had a pretty good response rate. 2,600 people did respond and let us know what was preventing them from returning to work. What were those big barriers that they were facing? So a couple of things that stood out to us, there isn't just one big barrier or one silver bullet that if we addressed this barrier, everyone could go back to work. It's a combination of a lot of barriers. It's really individualized and complex and nuanced depending on where the individual is and their life circumstance. But what we did see is there were some themes across all demographic groups in terms of what individuals were looking for and supports that they needed to get back to work. So one was relevant and accessible training and job opportunities. So that could be accessible in terms of their local area or accessible in terms of online, remote, and flexible opportunities. The number two barrier was COVID health risks or concerns. So definitely still a barrier. And we're still in a pandemic and folks are still feeling that as a big barrier to returning to work. And that was the number one barrier for adults that were 55 and older. So really that community is facing that as a significant barrier. Number three was around individuals looking for quality jobs, and quality is in quotation marks as that is really individualized in terms of how it's defined, but there are some components of what a quality job could hit on. So really looking for wages and livable wages to support their lifestyle, looking for benefits, and looking for a level of flexibility as well as safety to make sure that they feel inclusive, included, and safe in their workplace. And then the last piece is around social supports and infrastructure. So you'll see on this graph mentions of affordable housing, childcare, transportation, broadband. Those were all barriers that existed before the pandemic, but definitely have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So lots of different barriers that we're seeing and that we are really hoping to work collaboratively with all of you and all of our other partners to address in the coming months. So here is another call out that we are one piece of this very broad, complex workforce system in Maine. You all are other very important partners in this, our employer partners, education and training provider partners, adult ed, CTEs, community college service providers, lots of partners that we all really need to be working together to address these very complex barriers that we're seeing after the pandemic. So what we want to talk about today is how we can embed some of the principles that we're using at MDOL and the SWB in terms of defining our strategy. How can we embed these principles into our work and into our recovery planning? So this is where we're going to engage all of you in some good thinking. So a couple of things that are really underlying all of our planning and recovery efforts. One is how can we be more collaborative and coordinated? We really want to work with all of you to create an aligned, accessible, and easy to navigate workforce system. We want to make sure that those communities that I talked about just a couple minutes ago that are historically marginalized, traditionally on the sidelines from employment, are at the center of everything that we're doing, and make sure that they are connected to, supported, and advancing in inclusive and safe and fair workplaces. We want to be outcomes driven. So everything we're doing, we really want to have a clear connection to moving the needle on increasing employment opportunities, increasing wages, increasing credential of value. We want to be innovative, so we want to hear about the good efforts that you all are already doing on the ground. How can we scale them? What are ways that we can think outside the box and work creatively together? And we also want the work that we're doing together to be sustainable. So we are lucky to have some funding coming out of the American Rescue Plan to really implement behind our main jobs and recovery plan efforts. And what we want to make sure is that this isn't just 2 years of really good efforts and then it stops. We want to be building sustainable systems to make sure that this is transformative change and doesn't end when the grant funding ends. So I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes providing an overview of how we're thinking about this broader workforce strategy. And again, this is outside of just the Department of Labor and SWB, but really with all of you as our key partners. So as I mentioned, one key tenet to our strategy is being outcomes driven. So the outcomes that we're trying to drive toward are these 3 here. So increasing the size of Maine's talent pool by 75,000 workers, increasing the percent of individuals with a credential of value, and that is in quotation marks as it is still being defined, and increasing the average annual wage. These might look familiar to all of you. These are really the underpinnings for the 10-year Maine Economic Development Plan and the Maine's Jobs and Recovery Plan. So how we plan to do that is through a number of different strategies and activities. So in order to increase the size of Maine's talent pool, we want to be working to break down barriers for workers with a focus on those priority communities. And we want to be working collaboratively with the business community and economic development community to attract new workers. In order to increase the percent of individuals with a credential of value, really focusing on connecting individuals to high quality training and connecting them with degrees. And how we plan to do that is make sure that we're aligning training and education with the labor market needs and what businesses need today and what they anticipate needing in the future, offering career exploration and guidance opportunities, and providing direct financial assistance to ensure individuals have the supports they need to persist in degree attainment. And lastly, in order to increase the average annual wage, we want to be working to ensure individuals have clear pathways to quality jobs. So doing that by building those career pathways for the high growth in demand sectors, exposing residents to those career opportunities at an early age, and expanding the accessibility of high quality pathway programs. And we also want to be working with our business partners and the employer community to offer high quality jobs. And that is through working with employers to support investing in training, working with employers to create more diverse and inclusive workplaces to support those priority communities. So I mentioned the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan a couple of times. This is public, so if you Google Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan, you'll be able to see the full plan. This was really a driving force into how we're leveraging some of this American Rescue funding to really make sure that we're advancing some of these goals. And these were developed after about 1,300 individuals were engaged in listening sessions and focus groups and survey efforts over the last couple of years. So that's really the driving force behind some of these strategies. So today we are talking about some of the ARPA initiatives, and that's the American Rescue Plan Act, and that's some of the funding that we're getting to drive forward some of the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan initiatives. So I just talked about these 3 goals that we're really trying to drive toward with our workforce efforts. To advance these goals through this ARPA work, we are looking at it through 6 different lenses that we'll hope to get your input on today. So 6 priorities. One is apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship and making sure that we're able to develop new pipelines to apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship, as well as expand existing programs. 2 is developing industry partnerships, so providing support for employer sector collaboratives to ensure that they're able to identify their workforce and training needs. 3 is really developing and expanding our ability to support job seekers with navigation and financial support and guidance. 4 is training and education support, so working closely with our education and training providers at Maine Community College, UMaine System, CTEs, Adult Ed, and really connecting all of those dots to lead to high quality employment opportunities. 5 is working with employers and providing them supports to create inclusive workplaces. And 6 is some healthcare workforce strategies. So I just touched on a bunch of these, but I'll keep this up for a second to let you digest since it's a busy slide. But apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship, just a couple of additional notes here that there are some sectors of focus. So healthcare, clean energy, manufacturing, and other COVID-affected industries. Industry partnerships, as I mentioned, is going to be some funding to support sector-based collaboratives to support employers' efforts in training, networking, recruitment, and industry awareness. Training and education support, as I mentioned there, working closely with our partners to expand training and education opportunities. Healthcare workforce, we're looking at healthcare navigators to help individuals that are within Maine, coming from outside of Maine, from out of state or out of country, to navigate the workforce system and understand the credentials needed to plug into healthcare jobs, as well as providing tuition remission to ensure that incumbent employees have the funding needed to advance in healthcare careers. Supporting job seekers with financial assistance to overcome barriers, as well as expanding our reach via more outreach workers and career center counselors. And looking at creating an integrated workforce portal that connects all of the dots in this workforce system, so there is a one-stop shop for folks. And lastly, working with employers and creating inclusive workplaces by working closely with our DECD partners, as well as looking at programs like the Worker Opportunity Tax Credit Program. Last slide, wanted to just give you a sense of where we're at in these planning efforts. So over the summer, all of the proposals for how the ARPA funds could be used were approved within legislation that is also publicly available in a bill. So where we're at now, the September-October timeframe, I think you are our 6th listening session. So we've had great conversations with folks across local area boards, as well as statewide partners, to really just gather input from you all to help inform how are we designing some of these programs and how are we really looking at implementation. So we want to hear from you all how to be really embedding some of the considerations and questions that you raise. And then we're looking at later fall, early winter from when initiatives will really start to be rolled out in terms of the funding opportunities that you might be eligible for, and implementation will start beginning then. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you and open it up for a couple of questions. And then we're going to get into breakouts to hear even more what's on your mind. But curious if there's anything jumping out to folks that you wanted to raise. Oh, yes, and feel free to use the raise hand feature. Thanks, Stacey. Go ahead, jump in.
Yeah. Sam, you know that's probably the only time I've ever actually raised my hand to speak. Everybody can laugh. So tell me a little bit more about Goal 1. I put it in the chat so that I better understand. When you talk about increasing the talent pool by 75,000, you know, in the workforce development space, you know, we don't do economic development, so we need to know what portion of that 75,000 is or like what Sarah, I think we might call conversions, converting people not in the labor force into the labor force that existent. They're already in Maine, they're Mainers. And then how many of those are you anticipating to come from someplace else, which is allowable under our programs, internationally would be allowable, but then not by state. So that kind of breakdown. And then how many years do you think it'll take us to reach this goal with a net 75,000?
Yeah, great questions. And I think I would need to pull up the 10-year plan to give you the exact breakdown. I think it's about 2025 or 2030 is when those benchmarks were set. So in the next couple of years, aiming toward, I think 2030, but I can get back to you with that, Stacey. And I think it's a mix, is really making sure that we're breaking down barriers for the existing workers who aren't participating in the labor force, and working with our economic development partners to make sure that folks that are out of state or out of country see Maine as a great place to live and work. So I think it's a good mix of those.
Can we steal back everybody that left? Glenn knows what I'm saying, you know. Call them all
Great
back.
Come back. Come back and live
Yeah,
here.
I'm sorry. You went to high school here. It doesn't count. It's okay. I'm sorry. In any event, okay, good. So we want to parse out sort of like out of that 75,000 for our little central Western Maine area, what are we really talking about in terms of conversions and that's sort of like what I wanted to sort of get to for us so that we know what our goal might be for our area in a way. And so I could work backwards from that for a little bit better understanding if now. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can pull that economic development plan, Stacy, and I know that our friends at CWRI also have lots of good data that they can look at by county. So happy to partner with you on how we can get you that data. Thanks, Stacy. Anything else jumping out to folks that you wanted to jump in with before we get to breakouts and hear all of the feedback from you guys? Peaches.
Hi, good morning, everybody. When I look at your goals, your objectives, your strategies, great stuff. But what calls to me is that doing these things will have to include better childcare, better transportation, better wages, a commitment from employers to do things differently, a whole bunch of stuff that Department of Labor on its own would certainly not be doing. So I'd like to, and it might be in the recovery plan, but I'd just like to raise that and make sure that, you know, we can be out there giving people a lot more training, and then they don't have childcare. So it's that kind of thing, and the whole issue of health and safety.
Yeah, it's a great point, Peaches. And this is not something that just the Department of Labor, just the Career Center can address on their own. There are those systemic barriers that came up in the survey: affordable housing, transportation, childcare, broadband, all huge factors to supporting workers. And we're working closely with our state agency partners to make sure that workers are at the center of a lot of this infrastructure building efforts, making sure that we're understanding when we talk to employers too, how can they think differently about supporting workers' needs across the spectrum, not just immediate, but also kind of those systemic ones. So yes, great point, Peaches.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think with that, we're going to go ahead and get into breakouts so we can keep the good conversation rolling. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to share my screen one more time so you get a sense of what we're going to be doing for the next 20 minutes. Okay, here's where we're at. So we're going to talk about these 3 different goals. We're going to split out into 3 or 4 groups, and each group will get assigned a goal. So if you're looking through the lens of this goal, increasing the size of Maine's talent pool, for example, we want you to help us think through, how do we embed the principles that we talked about? So how do we work really innovatively? How do we collaborate differently? How do we embed equity into everything we're doing? And how do we ensure this work is sustainable? So we're going to break off into 3 or 4 groups for 20 minutes, and we're going to use the virtual whiteboard. I think you guys have used this type of technology before, but if not, our facilitators will talk you through it. And I'm going to put the questions in the chat so you have a sense of what we're talking about, and then we will come back in 20 minutes. So Isaac, if you want to open up those rooms, I think we can jump. You should all get prompted to join a breakout room. If not, Isaac can help you out.
So Tobin, are you still willing to report out the few ideas we had here under the actual one we're supposed to do?
Yeah, that works for me, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we're all filtering back in. See if I see my 3 groups. Yes, it looks like we're all back. Okay, excellent. So we're going to just do a quick report out. You don't need to hit on every single thing your group talked about, but just 1 or 2 nuggets of interesting sticky notes that you want to elevate for the group. So we had a brave volunteer in our group. Glenn, 1 or 2 things that stood out to you?
Yeah, I guess things that stood out to me under innovation were the idea around more funding around the opportunity for people to actually go, see, do, and work. So it's not just go to a training, you actually get to go see where you might be working someday, things like that. And the other thing would be around better identification of all the different funds available that collaborators could reach out to and use in a more clear, dynamic format.
Awesome. Thank you, Glenn. Sarah, what'd your group talk about?
Nancy, I think you're up. We are the increase annual average annual wages by 10%. Nancy?
Okay, so we looked at a couple things. We looked at the equity, saying that one of the things we should look at is the pay gaps and why they occurred, and that would inform what we would do in the future. We looked at having experts help with job training to help the services. Wait a second. So that people knew where to go in and where they could go out, that sort of thing. We looked at innovation, and this was really interesting. We have to coach businesses to understand that they may have to reconfigure their jobs. You know, when we used to go to work, it was 9 to 5. It was you stayed at your desk and you did this or whatever. And now people have to relook at things and rethink things. Maybe it's a job share, maybe part of it can be done remotely. And we need to help people understand how that's going to occur. And do they have to buy, this wasn't discussed, but I know my daughter runs into this. Do they need to just buy some new equipment that maybe needs some training for people to go up, but maybe that helps them with, you know, with other things. And then we talked about sustainability, and we're looking at the root causes of why there's childcare issues, why there's transportation issues, and why also there's housing issues, because without those, we can't help them. And another thing was, how do we make sure people have a cushion so that they, if something comes up, like, you know, the car breaks down or, you know, the pipes glow or something in their house, that they have money so that they can still go to work and not be blocked because something just came up and blew their whole plan.
Awesome. Sounds like a great conversation. Thanks, Nancy. Chris, your group.
Yeah, and I'm gonna turn it over to Tobin here very quickly, but I made a mistake, and we were working on Sarah's a goal for about the first half of our time until I figured out that why are all these other ideas popping up? None of our groups adding them. So so Sarah, you know, your group, we added some stuff to yours, but Tobin, you can hit on the one.
That's why our board was so big. Thank you group, for contributing into our good thinking, your good thinking.
Yeah.
So yeah, even though we you know, had a bit of a late start, we were still able to come up with some good ideas about increasing attainment of credentials of value. For example, recognizing foreign credentials that are earned overseas and finding ways to pay for those, which can often be so expensive that they're prohibitive at times, even if they were recognized. Some other ideas included convincing employers that investing in their employees' level of education is actually an investment that is a retention tool to keep their employees, you know, with their company, so they can lower rates of turnover and things like that. Another idea that was promoted was having micro credentials that can be stacked. Also having seniors being able to obtain short-term credentials so they can rejoin the workforce. That's a population that has been impacted heavily by the pandemic. So finding ways to get the seniors in the community back to the labor force as well. So those were just a few ideas that our group had about increasing credentials of value.
Awesome. Great ideas, everyone. And just so you know, these post-it boards, we will be compiling all of the great thinking. So I know you didn't get to have a chance to say every single thing, but we've got a record of that. So thank you, everyone. So we are going to move into another breakout group and keep these good ideas flowing. So we're going to do 2 rapid fires is what we're calling them. So we've got, as I said, 6 kind of major buckets that we're thinking about for this ARPA funding. Apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship is 1, industry partnerships, and job seeker navigation and financial support and guidance. So we're going to talk about first round are going to be one of those 3. So we're going to break into groups. You'll be able to pick which one you want to go into, apprenticeship, industry partnership, or job seeker navigation. And our questions are pretty broad. We just want to get a sense from you. What should we keep in mind as we're planning these efforts? What are the questions that you have that should inform how we're thinking about these planning efforts? What's the good stuff that you're seeing on the ground or in other states that you want us to incorporate? So really just flagging what should we be keeping in mind as we are just designing these programs over the next couple of months, and what questions do you have? So we're going to do about 10 minutes. You'll pick one of those 3, and then we'll come back and switch to the other 3. So with that, Isaac, just go ahead and open those breakouts. And if you're not prompted, click your breakout icon, and that should pop up with the 3 different rooms, and they should each have a different name. And click on the one that's of interest to you.
Isaac, this is Sarah. I'm supposed to be an industry partner, not job seeker navigation. So I'm going to go there, okay?
Then we'll just switch. Yeah, Chris can go to that one. All right.
Thank you, Isaac.
And if you're having trouble, click that breakout room icon. It should prompt you. If it doesn't, Isaac will throw you in a room, and hopefully it's a topic that's interesting to you.
Does anyone need help going to a specific room?
What are we doing?
Okay, I think we're all coming back. So we're gonna do a quick, just one or two things again, share out, and then we'll do our last round of rapid fire, and then we'll close us out. And I think at the end when we were getting booted, Stacy, you might have volunteered, but I don't want to call on you if that's not what the hand was for. You're muted.
I'm sorry, it was to volunteer Kim, actually.
You see.
Kim saying no. Well, I'll start with one or two and then group jump in if there's other things that jumped out to you. We talked about a couple of things. So making sure that apprentices have the wraparound supports needed, apprentices and pre-apprentices. So transportation came up. In the transportation conversation, driver's license attainment and driving time came up, which I think is broader than just access to pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship, but really for the workforce in general. We also had a good conversation around making sure that apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship is not just targeted at youth, but individuals at all different stages of their careers, mid-careers, as well as older adults as well, as an opportunity for them to get connected to the workforce. I think team jump in if I misrepresented or didn't add something. No, okay, great. Let's go to industry partnerships. What'd you guys talk about?
I think Tobin, you're reporting out.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, we had a lively discussion, lots of great ideas. A few of the ones that kind of stood out. Nancy mentioned the importance of building trust and working together to be effective, having different partnerships and collaborations, work for that cause. One idea that I had was making sure that the partnerships are open and inclusive, that they are welcoming to new partners instead of just a circular, like, Go Boys Network, or I know you, or my dad, like being open to the idea of having new folks come in. And then I guess a third high point, Glenn had mentioned ultimately having partners contribute financially because they see the benefit of such partnerships. So that kind of goes toward the sustainability concept of having such partnerships continue even after the ARPA funding runs out. So just having employer buy-in to contribute financially. And so those were just a few of the ideas that we had. We had a really great discussion and lots of ideas, but hopefully that gives you an idea of our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Tobin. I also just want to say that we have had 6 of these and we are getting definitely new ideas in this session. So just appreciating all of the good creative thinking. Job seeker navigation, guidance, and support. What did you guys talk about?
Yeah, so I think the two biggest things out of our group was navigators, whether it's in person or virtual, making sure it's that they're available to the job seekers, and a common application that makes it very, very simple for job seekers to come in, no matter which door they enter, fill in on one application so that we can make sure that we're pointing them in the right direction.
Awesome. Great ideas. Okay, so we're going to do our last rapid fire round. Our topics of choice this time: training and education supports, employer engagement and supports, and healthcare workforce. So we're going to make this a little bit shorter so that we get you guys out on time. So we'll do about 8 minutes rapid fire. And Isaac, you can go ahead and open those rooms.
Hey, Nancy, is there a specific group you want to go into?
Chris, are you really sitting out back on your deck, or is that just a picture?
His background.
You-
That's it. That's his backyard.
It's my backyard,
Oh, cool.
my deck. Yeah, yeah. It's got a little pocket here in Biddeford that tucks up against the woods. So every chance I can be, I'm out here.
All right. We are all coming back. We are approaching the end of our session. Hopefully, lots of good ideas in that last rapid fire brainstorm. There were definitely a lot in ours. We talked about training and education supports. So I'm going to call on Tobin because he is the resident report out individual.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah, we had, again, another lively discussion talking about education and training. And one of the early ideas that we touched on was making sure that duplication and redundancy is minimized as much as possible, so that different organizations and things are talking to each other, so that this organization does this, and this one does that, and there's not like an overlap of the services that they provide in order to maximize the education and training outputs for individuals. Another idea that we touched on quite a bit was being innovative in outreach and recruitment in terms of non-traditional methods. So whether it's adopting to new social media things like TikTok or WhatsApp, going to places like mosques or grocery stores or community recovery organizations, just being able to be forward thinking and increasing the diversity and the types of recruitment efforts that you do. So yeah, those were, I guess, two of the main high points that we talked about.
Awesome. Thanks, Tobin. Employer engagement and supports. What did you guys talk about?
Yeah, I think ours really revolved around a fairly basic overarching idea, which is we need to make sure that we are listening to our employers and identifying what they say they need as opposed to going in and assuming what they need. So listening and make sure that our messaging is very, very clear to them, so that we're not wasting their time and making sure, and so that they clearly understand what it is that is out there for them.
Thanks, Chris. Last group, healthcare workforce.
So we had recognized that these different healthcare entities need to be held accountable to costs and wages, especially now during a pandemic. And then two things we wanted to keep in mind were that pathways aren't vertical in healthcare. And a lot of the times I think folks think that that is the case. And I think making that clear and having a step-by-step ABCD of what to do in order to get to a certain position. And then also there are different approaches, or there should be different approaches on how we communicate with workforce in healthcare because of the different sizes of health entities. So thank you.
Awesome, great. Thank you all. Lots of great ideas. And as I said, I think you're our sixth session and we still have lots of new ideas. So thank you for the creative energy this morning. Just in terms of next steps, we have one more session later this evening, and then we're compiling what we learned across all of our sessions. So that's what we'll be busy doing next week. So in the next 2 weeks, we'll have sent out to everyone who registered a recap, the recordings as well as these slides so that you can see what came up across all of these sessions, and we'll also post that on our website. And then as I mentioned, later this fall, early winter is when announcements will start to come out. We are still going through the approval process around how funds can be used, but that's when the funding opportunities will be announced. So we'll make sure everyone who's gone to the listening sessions is aware of those opportunities, and we'll be working with our local board partners as well to make sure you know what those are too. So I'm going to just put in the chat survey. So if you have burning questions, burning ideas that you weren't able to share, please feel free to click that link and drop them in the survey, or feel free to reach out to any of us directly and we can do our best to answer other questions. But thanks so much for hosting us, Central Western Maine, and we'll see some of you later this evening.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.